Welcome to Budget Beauty, where I help you look flawless for less. Welcome back, and a very special welcome if you're new here. My name is Jen, and this is Budget Beauty. We do everything beauty on a budget, and it is the end of 2023. So I am going to be ranking all of the eyeshadow palettes that I tried this year. And I had a goal of only buying 2 palettes per month, and you will see that I have way more than that. I tried so many palettes this year. I found some new favorites. I found some that I was really disappointed in, and I found some honestly that were just plain horrible. So we're gonna rank all of the palettes that I tried in 2023. This is gonna be a long video, so grab a drink, grab a snack, cozy up, and get ready for a massive, massive ranking. So if you're excited, give this video a big, huge thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed, your bell notification is turned on, because I upload lots and lots of new videos every single week, and we are full on in end of year declutter ranking season. I will be having a huge eyeshadow palette declutter video coming out shortly after this one. I mean, cutthroat, massive declutter. Don't forget to check out the description box down below, where you will find all of my favorite beauty subscription boxes, all of the makeup that I'm wearing in today's video if you would like to recreate this look. Spoiler alert, I'm wearing one of the palettes we're ranking today. I'll let you know which one it is when we get there, as well as discounts to my favorite indie brands, and come follow me on TikTok for a little bit more beauty on a budget. So let's rank a huge amount of eyeshadow palettes. I'm going to start with the worst palette of 2023 and work my way up to what's, in my opinion, the best palette for 2023, or at least the best palette that I tried in 2023. I'm not going to be swatching anything. I'm simply going to show you the palette and let you know why it's ranking where it's ranking. So the worst palette that I tried in 2023 is this little guy from Makeup Revolution. This is the Ultimate Nudes in Medium. This palette is awful. It blends away to nothing. It has no pigmentation, no opacity. I didn't like it at all. And I thought that it would be a lot better than it was, because there is light, mid-tone, deep mattes in here, but this palette was by far the worst palette that I tried for the year. And you know, I don't love Makeup Revolution anyways, and this palette is partially why. Next up is the Symphony palette from Ofra Cosmetics. Now, I don't love Ofra's eyeshadow formula as it is. There's really no palettes that Ofra's ever made eyeshadow-wise that I've liked, and this one, it was not very good. Again, not very opaque, and the coloring kind of blended away to nothing. Pretty similar to the Makeup Revolution, just maybe a tiny bit better. Then we have the Rachel Couture Golden Clove eyeshadow palette. Now, this came in a subscription box. If you're new to my channel, I'm a color lover. Now, I don't discriminate against makeup, but I love color, and this is very much a neutral eyeshadow palette. I do appreciate that there's light, mid-tone, and deep mattes, but it just didn't have much color payoff. And again, it's just neutral, kind of boring. The shimmers were really lackluster. Definitely not a brand that I would purchase from again. Next is the Scandal palette from Lorella. Now, Lorella has their own beauty subscription box. I don't subscribe to that. At least I think they still have a beauty subscription box. Well, this palette came in a beauty box. And again, similar to the others, just not a lot of color payoff, kind of blended away to nothing. Again, really lackluster shimmers in this, and just really overall just a pretty boring palette. Next is from the brand Okalon, and this is an indie brand. I love indie makeup, as you know. Indie makeup is some of my favorite makeup, but this palette just, it just isn't a very good palette. This is a Huda Beauty dupe. Now, I have the Huda Beauty palette, and it is fantastic. It's one that I'm keeping. It's one that I use a lot in my collection. This is nowhere near a dupe to Huda Beauty. Now, the colors are pretty similar. It does have kind of the swirly patterns. It has that weird like Petri dish shade in here, but definitely not the quality and opacity of Huda Beauty, and just really not a palette I would ever reach for, because I have the Huda Beauty one, which in my opinion is way better. This palette I was really sad about, because this comes from one of the brands that I really like. This is from Gourmand Girls, and this is the Secret Grove palette. Now, as soon as this was released, I was like, ooh, I love that color story. And let me tell you, I have tried this palette twice. The first time I was so disappointed. The mattes are awful. They blend away to absolutely nothing. There's no opacity whatsoever. The shimmers, they're pretty, but there's only a couple in the palette. It's mainly a matte palette, and the matte formula is not good. I tried it with 2 different eye bases, and disappointed both times, which I'm really bummed about because this is a brand that I really love. You'll actually see them ranked a lot higher in this ranking, but really disappointed in the Secret Grove palette. Next up comes from the brand Illuminati, and this is the Illuminati X Issa palette. Now again, this came in a subscription box as well. This palette has nothing to offer. It has nothing to offer. The pastel shades, they don't have any opacity at all. Your deepest shade in the palette is this black, and it's a matte with shimmer, and it's more of a shimmer. This is a pressed glitter. There's just not a lot in here. I did try this palette out, did not like my look at all, just wasn't really able to get really any color payoff. And that's unfortunate because there's a lot of products from Illuminati, like their lip products. I'm actually wearing their liquid lipstick today that I really like, but this eyeshadow palette is a no-go. Next is Ormartas USA Pearl Paradise palette. Now, when I got this in a subscription box, I was like, ooh, she's pretty. Like, she's got quite the spectrum of colors. We've got some really pretty shimmers in here, some pressed glitters, but some really pretty shimmers. I love that the mattes go from light to mid-tone to deep. No, this one did not perform very well at all. I did one look with this palette and had intentions of doing a second look and then just couldn't bring myself to reach for it. So I've never heard of this brand. Definitely not one that I would spend my own money on. Next comes from Beauty Creations. This is the Mini Pro palette. Now again, the color story of this, really beautiful. I love a good pink, I love a good purple eyeshadow. This little shimmer right here is absolutely beautiful. It's a shifty duochrome. There is depth in this palette. It's just not my favorite pink and purple palette, and I have so many. I don't think the Beauty Creations formula can stack up to some other brands. That's why it's ranking where it's ranking. This is Tingfi Glam palette. Now this is Temu's dupe of the Natasha Denona Glam. Now I will say for the price, this is a good palette. I have the Natasha Denona Glam. I love that palette. So this one, in my opinion, does not compare. Definitely not formula wise, definitely not color payoff wise, but this wasn't a terrible palette. It took a little bit of work to get the mattes built up, and the shimmers are nowhere as beautiful as Natasha Denona, and it's just not a palette I see myself reaching for ever again. Naked Urban Decay Robin Eisenberg. Now when this palette first was released, I was like, nope, I am not a big Naked fan. I actually have decluttered or will be decluttering pretty much all of my Naked palette. So spoiler alert, that's coming in the declutter. But I picked this one up because I thought the color story was fun for Urban Decay. There's some blues, there's some purples. Unfortunately, there are no deep mattes in this palette at all. All of your deep shades are shimmers. So you really don't get any mattes to add any depth. And then even worse to that, there's no light shimmers in this palette. Your lightest shimmers are these neutrals. So if you're gonna use any of the colorful shades, you're gonna get a really deep dark look, but you have no deep matte. Your deepest matte is this brown shade. So it's just not a very well put together palette. I did a couple looks with it. The shimmers are pretty, the colorful shades are pretty, but I couldn't get anything out of this palette on its own without reaching for another companion palette. It's just too much work for me. Next up is a palette from one of my favorite indie brands, Roshabi Cosmetics. I discovered this brand in Slay Glam Box, and you're gonna see a lot of the palettes ranking really high. This is the Beach Please palette. Now, the color story of this I think is really beautiful. The problem, again, is there's no depth in the matte. Your deepest matte is this like plummy purple color, but if you wanted to do a neutral look, you don't have any mattes. And this is more of a mid-tone matte. And I love a deep dark matte for the outer corner, and I don't have this in this palette. However, Roshabi's shimmer formula is exceptional, and this palette, the shimmers are beautiful. It's just lacking depth in the matte. Next is Trace Loose Beauty, the Dolce Vita. Now, I had never tried Trace Loose Beauty, and I got this in a subscription box, and I was excited to try this palette out. I actually think the color story is really pretty. It's a neutral palette with some colors. This blue shimmer right here is beautiful. We do have some depth. We've got some depth in the neutrals. We've got some depth in the colorful. Issue with this palette is the opacity. It just took a lot of work to get any color payoff, and I found that throughout the day my shadows faded really quickly, and there's really nothing special about this color story. Moira Celestial Love. First of all, the packaging is so bulky. I hate the packaging of this palette. I had never tried Moira Cosmetics. This is just a neutral palette. A neutral palette with some pinks. The formula's okay. The mattes are okay. The shimmer's very, very lackluster. At least compared to even like the Trace Loose palette, the mattes were a lot more buildable in this. It's just a neutral palette. I just can't rank it any higher because it's not one that I would reach for, because the shimmers, they are, like I said, pretty lackluster. Next up is this palette from Il Makiage. Now, this palette formula-wise is pretty good. There's 4 shimmers, 4 mattes. The mattes, beautiful. I love that there's light, mid-tone, and deep. The shimmers, The shimmers weren't that great, and that's why this palette is ranking a little bit lower. For a neutral palette, I think this color story is pretty, and the quality of the mattes was really good. It's just the shimmers. The shimmers are just not something that I would ever want to reach for again, so I couldn't rank this palette any higher. Juvia's Place the Bronze Rustic. Now, I love the color story of this palette. I love oranges and bronzes. Those are my colors. I love warm toned colors. Again, with this palette, it's the lack of depth. So we've got these 4 mattes. These 4 mattes. This is the deepest matte. It's not deep. This is a mid-tone matte, and this red is very much an orangey red, so you couldn't use that as an outer corner. And the shimmers, nothing special. Juvia's Place makes way better mattes and shimmers than this palette. ColourPop Power Puff Girls. Now, I actually bought this palette last year, but I didn't try it until this year. And again, you're gonna see a common theme with these palettes ranking a little bit lower. There's no depth in this palette. 0. There's really light mattes. I mean, these that look deep, they're not deep when you put them on the eyes. And it's just not a color story I'm gonna reach for. It's very much a neutral palette with a couple of colors. I have kind of fallen out of love with ColourPop. I only bought 1 ColourPop palette the entire year of 2023. 1. And that palette you'll see in the ranking as well. But this one, I used it once and that was enough for me to know that it's not for me. Next up is this little e.l.f. palette. This is just a little 4-pan e.l.f. palette. Now, this has better quality mattes than a lot of these other palettes. It's just kind of a boring color story. I like it for drugstore. It's good. It's just, I'm never gonna reach for it. It just doesn't have much to offer for me. It's got 1 matte and 3 shimmers, and the matte isn't very deep. And what am I gonna do with 1 brown matte? That's just not something that I can see myself creating a cohesive look with. And we have the Too Faced Let's Play palette. The quality of this, really nice for Too Faced. Nice mattes, nice shimmers. Now, the shimmers aren't indie shimmers by any stretch of the imagination, but for mainstream, for Too Faced, they're pretty good. It's just a palette that's a little bit more neutral. It's not one I really reach for. There's other palettes that I reach for a lot more. So although the formula is nice, it's definitely not my favorite. This one may surprise a few people. This is the Pat McGrath Celestial Nirvana Little 5-pan eyeshadow palette. Now, this came in a subscription box. I do not like this palette at all. I don't like it. This matte right here is a mid-tone matte. So again, 0 depth in this palette. You have 1 matte and 4 shimmers. 4 shimmers. And I don't think these shimmers are very good. The indie shimmers are 1,000 times better than this. And this is an expensive palette. I don't understand why there's 1 mid-tone matte. I mean, it's really hard to create a look with this without reaching into another palette. And honestly, I don't think that the formula of this is that great. Laura Lee Los Angeles Whimsical Nudes. Okay, now let's talk about Laura Lee. I have decluttered most of her palettes. I just don't think her formula is that great. I used to think it was that great, but it's not that great. Now, her collab with Manny was much better. You'll see that palette ranked a lot higher. This palette for me was lackluster. I love that there's inclusions of greens and some colors in this palette. It's just not plain boring nudes, but the formula is not that great. The mattes aren't very opaque. The shimmers are nothing special. It's just not that fantastic. And I feel like I remember Laura Lee, in my opinion, being better. Maybe I've just found brands that I like better and it just doesn't rank very high. Now, this palette was a bit of a disappointment for me. This is the Juvia's Place Coffee Shop palette. Now, I picked this palette up because I loved the depth of it. There's light, mid-tone, and deep mattes. Unfortunately, again, Juvia's Place quality in this palette is not very good. I found the mattes to be patchy. They were very hard to get opacity and to layer nicely. I tried several different eye primers without an eye primer. Every look I created, I felt like it took a lot of work for a mediocre look, which again is not typical of Juvia's Place. And although I like the neutral color story of this, just the formula is not that great. We have another e.l.f. palette. This is a 10-pan palette. This is just a neutral little 10-pan palette. Now, the formula of this is nice. I actually used this in a testing new makeup video, and I created a really pretty look with this. I love, again, light, mid-tone, and deep matte. It's just neutral. And I just can't put put a neutral palette higher than some of my favorite more colorful palettes. I always say that with a neutral palette, I like there to be different variants of shimmers. Like, I like there to be a spin on the neutral palette. And this is honestly just a neutral palette, although good, just a neutral palette. Speaking of neutral palettes, this one from AOA is actually really good quality, but it's ranking a little lower because it's neutral and the pans are so small. It's really hard to get a brush in, but honestly, for neutral palettes, this one ranked a lot higher than some of the others, including Pat McGrath, because the formula is better. The mattes are really good. The shimmers are good, not great, but good. And this is like a $1.55 eyeshadow palette. Then we have Natasha Denona. This is the mini nude palette. It's okay. It's okay. I like Natasha Denona. I don't love Natasha Denona. Definitely some of her palettes are better than others. This one's okay. I do appreciate that there's a mid-tone and a deep matte. There is not a light matte. So again, it'd be nice to have another matte. And then there's 3 shimmers, and these 2 shimmers look really similar on the eyes. That's partially why this palette ranks a little bit lower, because for the price, these 2 shimmers being so close on the eyes, definitely not worth it. Next up is the Nabla Read My Mind palette. Now, I will say that the formula of this is really nice. I love that we have a burgundy row, a pink row, a green row, and a neutral row. I have tried all of the different rows and they're really nice. The quality of this palette is nice. The issue that I have with it is it's just neutral. It's so neutral with the exception of the green row, and the green row was my least favorite as far as performance. So I couldn't rank it any higher. I do appreciate that there's different colors in here, but formula wise and just color story wise, this is where it ended up. We have this little guy here from Essence. This is the Don't Worry, Be Happy, I think is the name of the palette. This is a pretty little cool toned palette. I featured this in a full face of Essence. I believe it may have been a testing new makeup. This is a pretty palette. I'm just not gonna reach for it. I don't think the mattes are that great. The shimmers are beautiful. And for like a $3 or $4 palette, if you want an easy, inexpensive cool tone palette, I would recommend this one. Just in my whole collection, it just isn't one that I can see myself reaching for any more than I have already. We're back again with Juvia's Place, this time with the Nubian 2. Now, the color story of this one, much more exciting in my opinion, because we have some fun colors. We've got blues and greens. However, again, and I don't know if it's just me, it might just be me, or it's just these palettes, I just don't think the formula is that great. The mattes have opacity and color payoff. They're a little hard to blend, and the shimmers just meh. They're just kind of meh. And this is truly a neutral palette with a couple pops of color. Again, not my favorite from Juvia's Place. I have this little Delancey quad. This is a special shade quad. It is all multi-chromes. Now, I will say that the multi-chromes are really nice in this. They're really, really beautiful. I don't reach for all shimmer palettes a whole lot, so they just don't typically rank as high as a more matte and shimmer palette. However, I think the quality of these multi-chromes is really, really nice and definitely a pleasant surprise from Delancey. Next up is from Gourmand Girls. Like I said, I really do like Gourmand Girls. This is the Together palette with Saints, Angels, Sinners. I also very much like Saints, Angels, Sinners. This palette, it's the color story, why it's ranking where it's ranking. It's definitely a little bit more light, a little bit more pastel. Now, there are some deep, dark shades in here. The shimmers, chef's kiss. Gourmand Girls, Saints, Angels, Sinners, indie makeup in general makes amazing, amazing shimmers. So that's what saved this palette and put it a little bit higher, but not my favorite color story. This one is from JCat Beauty. This is the Dia A Nortis palette. I actually just shared this in a testing new makeup. Now, this is nice quality. This is a nice quality palette. The mattes were great. The shimmers were great. There's lack of depth though in the mattes. There are no deep mattes. Even in that video, I had to use this dark purple shimmer as my outer corner because there's just no depth. So because of that, this is where it's landing. That's kind of the same story with this palette from Rasha B. Now, I will say that the color story of this palette I think is really, really unique and fun. I love how grungy it is with a little bit of teal. Definitely a color story I like, but you literally have one matte. This is your matte, and it's a light to mid-tone matte. The shimmers, stunning, especially these grungy shimmers, absolutely stunning, but I have to pair this with another palette, so I couldn't put it any higher. Another Rasha B palette, this is the Bonfire palette. This palette is really, really beautiful. There is some depth. I like the deep dark mattes. There isn't really any mid-tone mattes though. You've got light mattes and deep mattes. The shimmers in this palette are really beautiful, but I will say that there's other Roshabi palettes that I think the shimmers are maybe a step up from this one. And again, just the lack of the variety of mattes is why this is falling here. We got the little dubstep palette from Rude Cosmetics. This is a great palette. This is really beautiful. We've got a light, a mid-tone, and a deep matte. We have really beautiful shimmers. This is more of a pressed glitter, and I don't love a pressed glitter. That's why it's falling here, because really the only shimmer is this guy here, unless you go with the pressed glitter. I will say the formula is really nice on this. I actually have really enjoyed Rude Cosmetics. We have a little Natasha Denona palette again. This is the little mini retro, and this again falling where it's falling because it's 3 shades. It's one light matte, one mid-tone matte, and one shimmer. Again, I can't create a cohesive look with this, so I have to bring in another palette, and whenever it's harder for me to create a look, it just doesn't rank as high as palettes that are a little bit more comprehensive. Now I know that this is just a 3-pan palette. The formula, really, really nice. Now this may be a bit of a surprise because I love Nomad Cosmetics, and this is the Nomad Air. Now the reason this palette is falling here is because it's just a neutral palette. It's a very neutral palette. Nothing exciting as far as neutrals go either. We've got 3 mattes, 3 shimmers. The shimmers are beautiful. This is meant to be a travel palette. That's why it's a smaller palette. It's meant for travel. I personally don't see myself reaching for this that often. Although the formula is really nice, it's definitely not my favorite neutral palette. Another little guy here from Roshabi. This palette is really pretty. This is the Peridot palette. The shimmers, gorgeous. 4 shimmers, 2 mattes, all 4 shimmers, beautiful. The mattes, really nice quality, but again, we don't have any depth. We've got a light and a mid-tone, and so I'm reaching into another palette to create a cohesive look. As far as quality though, really, really good. Roshabi, fantastic. Then we have the Tarte Sweet Cravings palette. Now I do like this palette. For a Tarte palette, for a mainstream palette, for a neutral palette, I like this one because it has some uniqueness in the shimmers. These shimmer formulas are different, all of them. Some of them are very foiled and very sparkle and very wet, and some of them are more like toppers, and some of them are more like a matte with the shimmer, and I like that. I just don't reach for neutrals a lot. Like I said, it's really hard. If I'm gonna rank a neutral palette at the top, it's gotta be a really, really special neutral palette. Although this is good, it's not that really special neutral palette. And we have Blend Bunny. Now Blend Bunny, one of my favorite indie brands, this is the Forget Me Not palette. Now this is the palette that they put out to be a travel palette. It has everything you need to do a full face. Supposedly there's bronzers and blushes and highlighters and everything in this one palette. I struggled to get a bronzer shade that would work for me. I thought this was beautiful on the eyes, but for me, this is just a neutral eyeshadow palette. The shimmers are beautiful as highlighters as well, but you can really use any shimmer as a highlight if you choose to. It just doesn't make this that special palette that it says that it is from Blend Bunny. Now the quality is really, really nice. I did like this palette, but again, for me, it's just an eyeshadow palette, not a comprehensive face palette, and that's why it's ranked here. Next up is Melt Cosmetics Bad Zodiac Fire. This is a pretty palette. I do think for Melt, because Melt is hit and miss quality-wise, I do think this is the good Melt quality, but it's neutral. It's neutral, and there is a couple shimmers in here. The shimmers are pretty. I like this palette. I will continue to use this palette, but again, it's neutral and it's not that really special neutral. And that kind of goes for the Melt Air palette. This one ranked a little bit higher because it has a little bit more to offer. It's not just a neutral palette. We've got these pops of purple, and this shimmer right here is really, really beautiful. I actually do like this palette. I like that I can get a smoky neutral look with a pop of purple, even just popping it on the lower lash line, and that's why I put this one a little bit higher. Now this is where it starts to get a little bit harder for me. We're getting into some of my favorite brands, some of my favorite palettes. Next up is this 5-pan from Natasha Denona. Again, neutral. Although the formula is really nice, I appreciate that we have 3 mattes, lots of depth, 2 really pretty shimmers. This is a pretty palette. It's great if you want a simple eye look. I mean, it's everything you need for a cohesive eye look. It's just that it's neutral, and I have some neutral palettes in my collection that I think are just a little bit better than this one. Too Faced Italian Spritz. Now this palette actually took me by surprise. As soon as this was released, I wanted to get it because I loved that there were some pops of colors. These colorful shimmery mattes, these colorful shimmers are really nice quality, really nice. And actually the mattes in this palette are really nice as well. It is still neutral. It's the typical Too Faced neutral with a few pops of color, but the quality of this one is actually really nice. Face Beauté Aura. Now this one ranked a little bit higher than the other purple leaning palette because it has some excitement. There is this really pretty green shimmer here and then this purple kind of duochrome shimmer. And I like the inclusion of these grungy neutrals. They're neutrals, but they're grungy, so they're a little bit different. And I love that you can create a grungy purple leaning look from one palette, which is pretty unique to my collection. We have another 5-pan Natasha Denona palette. This is the Fez palette. I actually do like this palette because it has this blue shimmer, and the blue shimmer is beautiful, especially popped on the lower lash line. A full neutral look with that blue on the lower lash line. That's my go-to with this palette. So this one ranked a little bit higher because there is that blue shade, which is absolutely beautiful. Then we have the Anastasia Beverly Hills or ABH Primrose palette. Now this one actually has these two shades here, which can be used for blush or eyeshadow. I use them for blush and they're both really beautiful. This one's a bit light for me, so I'll mix the two together. But for a neutral palette and for a mainstream palette, this one is really nice. I actually really like the quality of it, and I love that there is the inclusion of some purples and then this really pretty pink shimmer. So overall, ABH wise, and I have decluttered almost all my ABH palettes, this one is really nice. ColourPop Good as Gold. Now this is certainly not a new palette this year, but this one was new to me. I actually picked it up this year because I wanted a palette that had some really pretty golds, and I thought, let's do the ColourPop Good as Gold. And this is a nice palette. The shimmers in this palette are really pretty. There's lots of depth in the mattes. It's pretty good formula. I mean, for ColourPop, it's one of their good formulas. It is neutral, but it has the grunge and it has some of those special shimmer shades, and that's why I placed it a little bit higher. Next up is the palette I'm wearing on my eyes today, and this may be surprising as well, and this is the Pat McGrath Divine Rose Quad. Now I got this in a subscription box. I would never ever spend $62 on this, ever. And like I said, this is the palette I'm wearing today. It's not my favorite. Again, there's no depth. I had to really like load up my outer corner with this shade, and it is a mid-tone matte. It is not a deep matte, and I still didn't get the depth that I like. And honestly, the shimmers aren't that great. This shimmer is pretty. This shimmer is kind of blasé. This shimmer is pretty. This shimmer kind of saved the palette. I 100% don't think this is worth $62, and I just, for what it is, could not put it any higher. I'm back with Natasha Denona, this time with the Mini Triochrome palette. This palette is pretty. My issue with this palette is a lot of the shades look the same on the eyes. That seems to be an reoccurring theme with Natasha Denona, and I don't love that. These two shades right here in my video, they don't look that much different on the eyes. And again, 5 shadows, $27. Now, these are pretty. The shimmers are pretty. They are nowhere near Indie Multichrome. She calls this a triochrome or a multichrome. I would say it's more like a duochrome. Next up is from Saints, Angels, Sinners, and this is the Fairy Lights palette. Now this palette is pretty. I really like the color story because there's neutrals, but there's also some fun greens and pinks and the shimmers. The shimmers is why this palette is ranking higher than the others. Like I said, the shimmers from Saints, Angels, Sinners are spectacular. Their mattes are really good. This is the good matte formula, not the great matte formula, but the shimmers is what saves this. We have the Thankful palette from the brand Color or Choler. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. I actually just recently got this in a subscription box. This is really nice. This yellow matte is spectacular. It is so opaque and beautiful on the eyes. I use all the shades in here in one look, and it was beautiful. It's very much a fall leaning palette. I mean, you can wear whatever colors you want whenever you want, but it gives me fall vibes. I love the inclusion of the blue shimmer, and like I said, this yellow matte, amazing. Saints, Angel, Sinners in collaboration with Ice Cream Beauty. This is the Friendsgiving palette. So this is another one that I recently received in a subscription box, and I like this one as well. The shimmers again saved it. And I love that it's so colorful and pretty. I love we have a black matte, and then I love that we have these purples. Actually, these three together, these two purples in this matte, black, beautiful look with this pop of purple shimmer. This is a really nice palette, and I like that there is some colors, and like I said, the shimmer formula, really nice. From the brand Mermaid Scales Cosmetics, in collab with Ice Cream Beauty Box, that is a subscription I subscribe to. I had never tried Mermaid Tails, and this palette is pretty. My issue with this palette, and the reason it's not any higher, is because it lacks a deep dark matte for me to add some depth to the look. The deep shades, the purple and the blue and the green, are all shimmers. So that's why it ranks a little bit lower. However, these two duochrome shades, gorgeous. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And I do really love this color story. Another Rashbi Cosmetics palette, the Candy palette. This came out for Halloween. I love this palette. This orange shimmer right here, it shifts from orange to gold to white. It's so beautiful. This dark matte is like a green black, a very unique matte. It's just a really pretty color story. And again, the shimmer's spectacular. And I love that there are this light, mid-tone, and deep matte, and it just creates the most fun, beautiful look. Another Rashbi, this is the Extraordinaries, Extraordinaries. Aries is in the sign. And I like this palette for the shimmers. Now the mattes, they're just your basic mattes. I do like the grungy mustard yellow. The shimmers, that's where it's at. Another Rashbi, this time, is the Gold Digger palette. Again, more of a neutral palette, yes. But again, the shimmers, especially this shimmer right here, she's beautiful. She is shifty, green, blue, purple, gold. And then this purpley shimmer down here, just absolutely beautiful. And with Rashbi, their mattes are really good. It's really the shimmers that take the cake. And I can't say that enough. It's really the shimmers that are placing these higher. Now this next one may be a little bit surprising, and that is the newest release from Odin's Eye. This is the Snow Dream palette. Now when this collection was released, this is the palette I wanted. Not the other palette, which, spoiler alert, is ranked higher. That wasn't the one I wanted. It was this one. This palette for me, I struggled. It was patchy. It was patchy to use. It was hard to use. I felt like it was hard to create a cohesive look with this palette. The shimmers are really, really pretty in this palette, as Odin's Eye shimmers are. I just struggled with this palette and just creating a cohesive look. I do have a video where I did a full tutorial with this palette and the Hey Reindeer palette. Definitely check that out if you want a full review, but unfortunately, Odin's Eye is ranking a little bit lower. Saints, Angels, Sinners, and Slay Glam Box, you're a star. The shimmers, I keep saying that it's the shimmers, this and this green shimmer. She is like a gorgeous ocean bottom. It's absolutely beautiful. And I do love the mattes in this palette as well. This matte right here that has some shimmer in it, gorgeous. The color story of this one, I'm very inspired by. I can see myself creating multiple looks with this. Another ABH, or Anastasia Beverly Hills, this is the Fall Romance palette. This palette has surprised me. This was much better than I expected it to be. I was gonna buy this palette when it was released, and then I actually got it in a Trend Mood box, so that was a huge win. I love it. I love the grungy greens. This dark purple shimmer is so pretty on the outer part of your lid. It's a really nice palette with the really good ABH formula. Now this is another palette that surprised me, and this is the Melt Cosmetics Electrip palette. I got this in a Melt mystery box. I don't typically buy Melt at full price because I buy all their mystery boxes and they always have amazing sales, and the quality of Melt is really hit and miss. Like I said, some Melt palettes are amazing, some of them are awful. This one's really good. I love this chartreuse shimmer. I love that we have light, deep, and mid-tone mattes, and the shimmers actually were really nice in this palette. I found that it was really easy to use, which isn't the case with all of the Melt palettes. Another Saints, Angels, Sinners. This is the Be the Gift palette. This one ranked higher because I really love this color story. I love the grunge, and then bam, we've got this mint green that is stunning as a transition shade. And then again, on repeat, the shimmers, the shimmers, the shimmers. Next up is the Ace Beauté Envy. So this is the green palette that was in the same collection as the purple palette that ranked a little bit lower. Now this one ranked higher because number one, the color story. I like the color story much better. The shimmers in this are beautiful, especially this light blue right here. It's such a pretty inner corner highlight. And I like the grunginess of this. I feel like for me, this is a much more cohesive palette that I can create way more looks with than the purple palette. Now this one was a bit of a surprise as well. This is the Too Faced Cosmic Crush. This is a neutral palette, 100% a neutral palette. What places this palette higher and what saves it is this shimmer. I would pay for this palette for this shimmer. It is beautiful. I have to say it is the most shifty, beautiful mainstream shimmer I've ever tried. And not to mention that this purple one is beautiful and this light gray or this gray matte, stunning. This palette for a mainstream palette is really nice. Notoriously Morbid is an indie brand that I love, and this is the Gold Dust Woman palette. Look at the grunge. This is so nice. These gold shimmers are spectacular. The only reason this isn't ranking higher is because it is a pretty limited color story. I mean, it's strictly golds, which is the Gold Dust Woman palette, but that's the only reason I ranked it a little bit lower. The formula is really nice. The shimmer's beautiful. I actually have a full tutorial video with this palette here on my channel. Glamlite Chucky. Now, the reason that this palette is ranking where it's ranking is this is a good palette. She's just dark. She is deep and dark. There are no light mattes. There's really honestly no mid-tone mattes unless you go really light-handed with the mattes in this palette. It is a very dark palette, which is what Chucky is. It's very dark, it's very grungy, it's very deep. That's my only complaint. I often have to pull in another palette if I want a transition shade or a mid-tone matte. The shimmers are beautiful. This silver is beautiful. This purpley shimmer with a black base, beautiful. I love Glamlite. I love Glamlite's formula. It's just I wish that they would have put in a few more lighter or mid-tone mattes. Now, if you follow me, you know Unearthly Cosmetics is my favorite indie brand in the whole wide world. However, I am ranking this Unearthly palette a little bit lower, and this is the Complex palette, and the reason for that is because this is an all shimmer palette. Although a spectacular, gorgeous all shimmer palette, it's an all shimmer palette. And like I mentioned, if I have to pull in another palette, then it's gonna automatically rank a little bit lower, and that's just to be expected with all shimmer palettes. This is beautiful though. If you want just a nice jewel-toned 6-pan all shimmer palette, this is definitely the one to pick up. So the only ColourPop palette I purchased this year is the Welcome Foolish Mortals from their Haunted Mansion collection. I actually bought the entire Haunted Mansion collection, and this palette is really nice. I am not mad that this is the only ColourPop palette I bought because it's really nice. It's a cool toned dream. The shimmers in here are beautiful. This blue shimmer, this purple there. The shimmers are really beautiful. The mattes are nice, and cool tones have made a comeback in 2023. And in my opinion, this is a really good, affordable cool tone palette. Now, Deck Cosmetics, one of my favorite indie brands as well, and this is the Plain Jane Remastered palette. So they put out their Plain Jane palette a couple years ago. I own that palette, and then they released the Plain Jane Remastered, and I picked it up, and it's stunning. This is an all shimmer palette, all special shade palette. Again, that's why it's ranking a little bit lower, but it's a beautiful all special shade palette. If you're more into neutrals like the light pinks and the light purples, then this is a great option for an all shimmer palette because the formula, I mean, you can't beat Adept's shimmer formula. And we have another Adept palette, and this one is ranking a little bit lower strictly based on the color story because it's neutral. Although I think that the palette is nice. This is the La Cienega. It is a neutral palette. I mean, all your mattes are neutral. Luckily, what saves this is the pop of color that you do get in the shimmers and just how beautiful these shimmers are. I mean, like I said, Adept's shimmers are fantastic. It gets harder and harder the further I get into this ranking. Oh, it gets so hard. Next up is from Unearthly Cosmetics, and this is the Get Groovy palette. This was the palette in their large summer mystery box, and I love her. She is a rainbow palette without a red, so I know it's not a true rainbow palette, but I love how colorful this is. And the formula, my favorite matte and shimmer formula ever is Unearthly. It's my favorite indie brand, hands down. The only reason I'm ranking this a little bit lower is because it's just a colorful palette. It's just a rainbow palette. And the shimmers are in here are beautiful. The mattes are beautiful. Everything's beautiful about it. But because it's just kind of your basic rainbow palette, it just has to rank a little bit lower. And then we have Lunar Beauty Full Fantasy in collaboration with Laura Lee. So I mentioned that I didn't love Laura Lee's formula as much anymore. But when she collabed with Manny, it's much better. I think that this is a much better formula. It is a neutral palette. That's why it's ranking a little bit lower. The shimmers are beautiful. The mattes are beautiful. If I had to choose, it would definitely be this palette over any other of the Laura Lee exclusive palettes and all of the Lunar Beauty palettes. I really like them all. And this one for a neutral palette is very very nice. Our second Nomad palette, this is the Nomad Cosmetics Ghost Town USA. This was their Halloween release. This palette is wonderful. Like I said, it gets harder and harder and harder the closer we get to the top. This palette is beautiful. Neutrals, we've got some blues and we've got some greens, so you can create blue looks, neutral looks, green looks, monochromatic looks. There's definitely some variety in here. The only reason it's not ranking a little bit higher is because it's, again, missing some of those lighter mattes. I mean, these mattes, they're fairly light, but they're kind of verging on mid-tone. I would like to see a few lighter mattes, but overall, I have no complaints of this palette, and I'm thrilled it's in my collection. Another Unearthly palette, this is Unforeseen. This is another all shimmer palette. Now, I have Unearthly's All I Ever Wanted palettes. I love them. Love, love, love those all shimmer palettes. This one is beautiful. This shade right here is my favorite. It's a multi-chrome that shifts from green to black to blue to gold. It's beautiful. But because it's an all shimmer palette and I have to pull in a matte palette, she's got to go right here, although I think it is fantastic. Then we have Glam Light with Nightmare on Elm Street. This is the Never Sleep Again palette. This palette is beautiful for a red palette. What I appreciate is that the reds are red. They're not berry tone. They are a true red. And when I see a red, I want a red. I very much appreciate that. My issue with this palette, again, is there's no light matte, and a lot of the mattes are very deep. This one is your mid-tone matte and it's still on the deep side, so it's a little harder to create a more cohesive look. I just wish they would have popped in a few lighter mattes, but this silver right here, this is my all-time favorite silver in my entire collection. It is stunning. From Saints, Angel Sinners, we have the Secret Sinner Society. Ooh, this palette, you guys, I love it. It gives me Chucky vibes from Glam Light in a smaller form. The mattes and the shimmers are amazing. If you want a deep, dark, smoky look, this is your palette. It is so, so good. I love this red shimmer. It's more like a matte with the shimmer and then this purple with a black base. This palette creates the most gorgeous smoky eye. Another Unearthly palette from their Small Summer Mystery Box. This is Spaced Out. I like this color story a little bit better than the other one, only because it has a little bit more variety. I can create a few more looks with this. It's not your basic rainbow palette. The shimmers are beautiful, and this is just a weird color story, but weird in like the best way. Nomad Cosmetics Love and Death palette. This was their Valentine's Day release. This side is my favorite. This cool tone side, the Death side. Love it, love it, love it, love it. I've created some stunning looks with that. Again, smoky, beautiful, cool tone looks. I do like the Love side, but again, it lacks a little bit of variety. A lot of these mattes look really similar on the eyes. There's not a lot of variety in the Love side. Although beautiful formula, it's lacking that variety, where this side is what saves it and puts it here in the ranking. Glam Light Scooby-Doo Creeps and Crawls palette. I think this color story is beautiful. The shimmers are 10 out of 10. The shimmers are really nice. The mattes are also beautiful, but again, we're lacking some lighter mattes. So you're gonna get a really deep, dark look if you don't pull in a palette with some lighter mattes. These are very, very deep mattes. This is your only mid-tone, and it still veers on the deep side. And then all of your shimmers are very dark as well. Although beautiful, the formula is beautiful. I love the smokiness of the look. I just wish there was maybe one lighter matte and maybe one lighter shimmer. This was my first Wicked Widow palette. This is the Graveyard Smash, and this came out for Halloween. I love this. This is another weird yet spectacular color story. I love how grungy it is. I love this mustardy green matte, and then this green matte, so beautiful. The shimmers are stunning as well. This brown shimmer is so unique to my collection. It's kind of a taupey gold brown shimmer. Very beautiful. Fantastic quality. I'm definitely putting Wicked Widow Beauty on my radar to try more palettes this next year. And we have Unearthly Cosmetics Surrender. This is the palette that came in their Valentine's Day mystery box, and I love Unearthly. As you know, the formula is amazing. The mattes are great. The shimmers are great. It's a neutral story. It really is just a neutral palette with some pinks and some reds. Although beautiful, it's still a neutral palette. So I couldn't put it any higher, but I do, as always, think the formula is beautiful. Natasha Denona My Dream palette. Again, a neutral palette. Beautiful formula. This is the really good Natasha Denona formula, like the really good formula. This shimmer right here, this duochrome shifty green and gold, is so beautiful. That is what made this palette rank a little bit higher because it adds some uniqueness to a neutral palette. The mattes are beautiful. The shimmers are beautiful. Like I said, it's the really good Natasha Denona quality. Glam Light Scooby-Doo Part 2. She is large and in charge, but I like this palette because of the variety. There are so many different looks that you can create with this palette. It's colorful. There's neutrals. The shimmers are really nice. The mattes are really nice. And this just falls a little bit higher because there's so much versatility in this palette. And we have the first Scooby-Doo. This is the Rut-Row Reggae palette. Now this one ranked a little bit higher than Creeps and Crawls because it has more variety in the matte. So we have some light, some mid-tone, and some deep mattes. We have light, mid-tone, and deep shimmers, and it's a green palette, and I love a good green eye look. I love a good green eyeshadow. The formula, as always with Glam Light, is wonderful. Another Glam Light palette, again from the Friday the 13th. This is the Freddy Krueger palette. Mama loves the grunge. I love the grunge of this. It is so beautiful. I loved the look I created in my video. Again, I have a full video with the Nightmare on Elm Street collection. I love the mattes. I love the shimmers. My only complaint, again, is I wish that there was just a little bit lighter matte. This light shimmer, beautiful inner corner highlight, beautiful, beautiful. I just wish there was one lighter matte, but fantastic quality. Another Glam Light, this is the Hershey's Cookies and Cream, and this is Glam Light's Cool Tone palette. Like I said, Cool Tones made a comeback this year. This palette is amazing. The shimmers are amazing. This blue, white, silver, spectacular. This dark kind of grungy metal silver, also amazing. Love that there's light, mid-tone, and dark mattes. I love this palette. If I want a cool tone kind of blue leaning look, this is what I'm reaching for. We're getting close to the top 10. It gets even harder. This is the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude. Now, she's a neutral palette. She is a nude, neutral girl, but it's so nice. The formula is so nice. Like, this is the exceptional Natasha Denona formula. And if I want a neutral, cool tone look, I'm reaching for this one. Next up is Blend Bunny. You guys know how much I love Blend Bunny. This is the Sugar and Grunge palette. I think this palette is so unique. I mean, we've got pastels, midtones, grunge, and then we have all the shimmers. And the quality, as always with Blend Bunny, so good. This palette took a lot of heat for it being a little bit differently laid out than the others, but I love that there's sugar and grunge in this palette. So if you want a pastel look, you got it. If you want a grungy look, you got it. Next up is from Lunar Beauty, and this is the Siren Sunset palette. This is Lunar Beauty's last palette release for 2023, and they went out with a bang. It is beautiful. There's multi-chromes and duochromes in here. She's a neutral palette with a twist. I love this teal green. Absolutely beautiful. This shimmer right here. This is an amazing palette from Lunar Beauty. We have an Adept palette. This is Minka. Now this palette is ranking high because it is a mostly all shimmer palette, but we've got these two mattes, and these two mattes are so beautiful. They are purple, but they pair beautifully with all of the gorgeous shimmers in this palette. These shimmers are multi-chrome, duochrome, beautiful goodness, and these two mattes is all you need. These two mattes is all you need to create a beautiful look. Next up is the Odin's Eye Hay Reindeer. Like I said, this is the palette I wasn't going to buy, but after I bought it and did an eye look with it, I fell in love with it. This color story is so unique to my collection. It is just a mishmash of colors, but they pair beautifully together. And when I look at this, I am instantly inspired to create an eye look. I mean, I can see so many eye looks with this, and although these are lighter shades, they are so opaque and beautiful on the eyes. This palette definitely took me by surprise. We have Unearthly Cosmetics Resurgence. This is the palette that Heather Austin here on YouTube created. She is one of my favorite YouTubers. I have her Adept palette as well. It ranked really high last year. This palette is so beautiful. Again, just a really unique, kind of weird color story, but in the best way. This lime green, stunning. The shimmers, beautiful. Another true red matte, and another palette that just inspires me when I look at it. When I think I want just a different look, I'm always thinking about the Resurgence palette. She did an amazing job with this. All right, you guys, we're in the top 10. We're in the top 10 palettes. I cannot even believe it. Coming in at number 10 is Shroud Cosmetics Moonfall. Oh, I love her. I love everything about her. I love that she's a 9-pound palette. I love that she's grungy. I love this palette. Now, this green shade, beautiful. The shimmers in here, exceptional. Shroud Cosmetics makes some beautiful shimmers, and I just love that they go grunge. They go deep grunge and absolutely unique and beautiful. Number 9, Unearthly Cosmetics Devour. Now this was Unearthly's Halloween release this year. This palette is all my dreams in a palette. I love this palette. I love the greens in here. I love the reds, the burgundies. I love that there are light, mid-tone, and deep mattes, and the shimmers. I mean, the shimmers are the exceptional Unearthly shimmers. I mean, Unearthly makes all fantastic palettes. I've never had a palette I disliked from them. They always are really high in the ranking, but this one, just color story wise and shimmer formula wise, I love this. I think this is one of the best palettes Unearthly has put out. Number 8 is the Basic Witch from Bella Beauty Bar. This palette is my first palette I've ever tried from Bella Beauty Bar, and I almost didn't buy it, and I am so glad that I did. This palette is stunning. I took this palette with me to Hawaii. I wore it every single day for a week. I got beautiful looks out of it. My best friend wore this palette in Hawaii. I love it. I love that there's deep, mid-tone, and dark mattes, and the shimmers. The shimmers are stunning. Bella Beauty Bar is on my radar. Bella Beauty Bar is a brand you will be seeing a lot in 2024. Number 7, Natasha Denona Yucca. Is this not beautiful? She's grungy and she has the best formula. I love the mattes. I love the shimmers. The shimmers in this palette stand out. They are the best shimmers, in my opinion, that Natasha Denona has put out. And I appreciate that it's not a boring neutral palette. It has some grunge. It has some depth. Every look I've created with this palette, I love. And when I think mustard yellow, kind of grungy, this is the palette I want to reach for. This is the grungy mustard yellow palette I want to reach for. Number 6 is from Unearthly Cosmetics, and this is the Sorceress Smoke. Sorceress Smoke. She's grungy. She's a neutral palette with some grunge, and this is the kind of neutral palette I want. There are special shades in here. There's unique shimmers. I mean, we've got this beautiful kind of green teal shimmer. We have a purple shimmer in here, and then we've got all the grungy mattes. So this is a neutral palette with a twist, and this is the kind of neutral palette that I want to reach for, and that will rank a little bit, and that ranks higher in my, and that will absolutely rank higher. When I think neutral, I'm thinking Sorceress Smoke. Number 5 actually comes from Gourmand Girls, and this is the Haunted palette. Now, I told you that Gourmand Girls I love. It's just that one palette was disappointing. This one, not disappointing. Love the color story of this. Love everything about this. This was their Halloween release. And again, you've got grunge, but then you've got these bright kind of jewel tone colors. This green shimmer right here, this Kelly green shimmer. Oh, it is so beautiful. This like citrine shimmer, this lavender shimmer. I mean, everything about this palette is gorgeous, like absolutely gorgeous, and it makes me inspired and want to reach for it. Number 4 comes from Nomad, and that is the Royal Europe. This palette is the best that Nomad has ever released. This is their palette with multi-chromes, and they nailed the multi-chromes. All 5 of these, gorgeous. Absolutely shifty and spectacular. The matte, buttery. Blend like a dream, and I love that they have a neutral row. We've got neutral, and then we've got colorful. That's what I like to see. A palette with a good variety of shades, whether I want a neutral or colorful look, and these multi-chromes, they knocked it out of the park with this palette. Number 4 is from Unearthly Cosmetics, and that is the Don't Be Jelly. I love this color story. Again, she is deep and dark, but she is unique. It is a colorful palette, 100%. The shimmers in this palette, the duochromes, the multi-chromes, are some of the best from Unearthly. I mean, along with Devour, the shimmers in here are beautiful. This color story is so unique to my collection. It's something that I want to reach for. I want to create eye looks with this. This cobalt blue is beautiful. The mint green matte is beautiful. This deep matte right here is like a brown, purple, black. It's just really unique and beautiful. And then they pop in this kind of red shimmer, this burnt orange shimmer. It's just absolutely beautiful. They revamped their original Don't Be Jelly palette, which was all special shades, to this one. I don't have the original one, but I am so happy that I have this one. We're on number 2. We're on number 2, and that is the Blend Bunny Lure palette. OMG, everything about this palette is gorgeous. I love the color story, the shimmers. The shimmers are the best shimmers Blend Bunny's ever put out. The mattes are the typical buttery, opaque, easy to blend, easy to layer, beautiful mattes. I love that they put their shades in rows so it makes it easy to create a monochromatic look. I love just blues and purples and greens together. Everything about this palette makes me excited. Are you ready? Dun, dun, dun. Drum roll please for palette number 1 of 2023, and that is from Adept Cosmetics. I love this palette. I mean, look at the color story. Look at the color story. These mattes are so beautiful. Adept makes nice mattes, but these mattes are excellent. Really, really nice. I love that there's light, mid-tone, and deep. I love that they're green and they're grungy, and this kind of chartreuse color is so beautiful on the eyes. And then you've got all these amazing special sparkly shades. So they gave you all these green mattes, and then of course they popped in some green shimmers, but there's blue shimmers and purple shimmers and pink shimmers and multi-chromes and duochromes. Every look I've created with this palette, I have just fallen in love with. Oohs and ahs over my eye look. I love this palette. I really, really love this. This shade right here called Nelson Ravitch. This shifts from green to blue to gold. Just everything about this palette is my dream come true. I want to reach for this palette all the time. That's why it's the number 1 palette of 2023. So those are all of the palettes that I tried in 2023. Wow, I bought a lot of palettes. I need to rein it in. I bought a lot of palettes in 2023. This ranking was so difficult. I think what I'm gonna do for 2024 is I'm going to do a monthly palette ranking. I'm going to rank all of the palettes that I tried in the month instead of saving it up for the whole year. I think that'll be a little bit more beneficial for you guys too, because the palettes would have been released a little bit sooner, so you can pick them up if you wanted. Some of these palettes may not be available anymore because they were from the beginning of the year. So my goal for 2024 is to do a monthly palette ranking rather than a yearly palette ranking. I may do like a top 10 of the year. I think I'll do that, or maybe top 20 of the year. But I'm really gonna focus on monthly rankings for you guys. And if you enjoyed this massive ranking, give this video a big thumbs up. Please subscribe, turn your bell on so you don't miss my big declutter and all of the fun videos that I have coming your way in 2024. I will of course link my favorite beauty subscription boxes, all of the makeup that I'm wearing in today's video. If you would like to recreate this look, discounts to my favorite indie brands, and come follow me on TikTok for a little bit more beauty on a budget. Thank you so much for ranking all of my palettes with me.